All right, today's our first day of reading Winesburg, Ohio. It's a really old copy. It's kind of destroyed. And you already read one story, which was called Hands with Wing Biddlebaum. And the table of contents in the introduction talks about the grotesque. So as you're reading this book, I want you to think about the character that's introduced and how they are grotesque. The book itself has three major ideas throughout. One is appearance versus reality, how things appear and how they are in reality. The inability to express oneself. And the main character that ties most of the stories together is George Willard and how he matures. So as you read each story, think about appearance versus reality, the inability to express oneself, and the maturation of George Willard. Now, after Hands, the next story is called Paper Pills, and the grotesque is a character named Dr. Reefy. Now, as you read, think about how or why he's a grotesque, and also think about why is the story called Paper Pills. So as I read, follow along and try to think about the answer to those questions. Here we go. Paper Pills. He was an old man with a white beard and a huge nose and hands. Long before the time during which we will know him, he was a doctor and drove a jaded white horse from house to house through the streets of Winesburg. Later, he married a girl who had money. She had been left a large, fertile farm when her father died. The girl was quiet, tall, and dark, and to many people she seemed very beautiful. Everyone in Winesburg wondered why she married the doctor. Within a year after the marriage, she died. So a couple questions you might be thinking of: why did she marry this doctor when she was so beautiful and rich? And how or why did she die? The knuckles on the doctor's hands were extraordinarily large. When the hands were closed, they looked like clusters of unpainted wooden balls, as large as walnuts fastened together by steel rods. He smoked a cob pipe, and after his wife's death, sat all day in his empty office close by a window that was covered with cobwebs. He never opened the window. Once, on a hot day in August, he tried, but found it stuck fast, and after that, he forgot all about it. Now, look at the resignation in the second chapter. We see the cobwebs, the empty office door, the window that won't open. It's as if he's imprisoned in the room and can't get out. Third paragraph. Winesburg had forgotten the old man, but in Dr. Reefy, there were the seeds of something very fine. Sounds a lot like our last story with Wing Biddlebaum. Alone in his musty office in the Hefner block above the Paris Dry Goods Company store, he worked ceaselessly, building up something that he himself destroyed. Little pyramids of truth he erected, and after erecting, knocked them down again that he might have the truth to erect other pyramids. Dr. Reefy was a tall man who had worn one suit of clothes for 10 years. It was frayed at the sleeves, and little holes had appeared at the knees and elbows. In the office, he wore also a linen duster with huge pockets into which he continually stuffed scraps of paper. Think of Paper Pills. Think of his suit compared to his office and the dust and must throughout. After some weeks, the scraps of paper became little hard round balls, and when the pockets were filled, he dumped them out upon the floor. For 10 years, he had but one friend, another old man named John Spaniard, who owned a tree nursery. Sometimes, in a playful mood, old Dr. Reefy took from his pockets a handful of the paper balls and threw them at the nurseryman. "This is to confound you, you blithering old sentimentalist," he cried, shaking with laughter. So, like Wing Biddlebaum in the story Hands, Dr. Reefy in Paper Pills has one friend. So look at the similarities throughout. Look at also the concentration paid on hands, the hands and hands, and then the wooden knuckles in this story. The story of Dr. Reefy and his courtship of the tall, dark girl who became his wife and left her money to him is a very curious story. It is delicious, like the twisted little apples that grow in the orchards in Winesburg. In the fall, one works in the orchards, and the ground is hard with frost underfoot. The apples have been taken from the trees by the pickers. They've been put in barrels and shipped to the cities where they'll be eaten in apartments that are filled with books, magazines, furniture, and people. On the trees are only a few gnarled apples that the pickers have rejected. They look like the knuckles of Dr. Reefy's hands. One nibbles at them, and they are delicious. Into a little round place at the side of the apple had been gathered all of its sweetness. One runs from tree to tree over the frosted ground, picking the gnarled, twisted apples and filling his pockets with them. Only the few know the sweetness of the twisted apples. Now, as we read each story, I'm going to ask you which line or lines ties the story together that you could write about this story. That last line is one of the best in this entire book. Only the few know the sweetness of the twisted apples. Now you can tell that's a metaphor. The metaphor of the apples, where there's they're ugly on the outside, but there's something sweet and precious inside, is very similar to Dr. Reefy. The girl and Dr. Reefy began their courtship on a summer afternoon. He was 45 then and already had begun the practice of filling his pockets with the scraps of paper that became hard balls and were thrown away. The habit had been formed as he sat in his buggy behind the jaded white horse and went slowly along country roads. On the papers were written thoughts, end of thoughts, beginnings of thoughts. So Dr. Reefy writes all these thoughts on the pieces of paper and he puts them in his pockets and they become these paper pills. It's again this inability to express oneself. One by one, the mind of Dr. Reefy had made the thoughts. Out of many of them, he formed a truth that arose gigantic in his mind. The truth clouded the world. It became terrible and then faded away, and the little thoughts began again. The tall, dark girl came to see Dr. Reefy because she was in the family way and had become frightened. She was in that condition because of a series of circumstances also curious. Now, I always ask my students at this part of the story, what does it mean that she became in the family way? Some of you might know right away. Feel free to blurt it out aloud because you're proud of yourselves. Some of you guys are probably like, what does it mean? I think I should pause for a little bit. Family way means pregnant. The death of her father and mother and the rich acres of land that had come down to her had set a train of suitors on her heels. For 2 years, she saw suitors almost every evening. Except two, they were all alike. So because she has money, all of these people, kind of like Penelope in the Odyssey, all of these people come to go see her. And they're all the same except for two. They talked to her of passion, and there was a strained, eager quality in their voices and in their eyes when they looked at her. The two who were different were much unlike each other. One of them, a slender young man with white hands, the son of a jeweler in Winesburg, talked continually of virginity. When he was with her, he was never off the subject. The other, a black-haired boy with large ears, said nothing at all, but always managed to get her into the darkness, where he began to kiss her. For a time, the tall, dark girl thought she would marry the jeweler's son. For hours, she sat in silence listening as he talked to her, and then she began to be afraid of something. Beneath his talk of virginity, she began to think that there was a lust greater than in all the others. At times, it seemed to her that as she talked, he was holding her body in his hands. She imagined him turning it slowly about in the white hands and staring at it. At night, she dreamed that he had bitten into her body and that his jaws were dripping. She had the dream 3 times. Then she became in the family way to the one who said nothing at all, but who in a moment of his passion actually did bite her shoulder, so that for days the marks of his teeth showed. After the tall, dark girl came to know Dr. Reefy, it seemed to her that she never wanted to leave him again. She went into his office one morning, and without her saying anything, he seemed to know what had happened to her. In the office of the doctor, there was a woman, the wife of the man who kept the bookstore in Winesburg. Like all old-fashioned country practitioners, Dr. Reefy pulled teeth, and the woman who waited held a handkerchief to her teeth and groaned. Her husband was with her, and when the tooth was taken out, they both screamed and blood ran down on the woman's dress. The tall, dark girl did not pay any attention. When the woman and the man had gone, the doctor smiled. "I will take you driving into the country with me," he said. So this gives you an idea of why this rich, beautiful woman falls for Dr. Reefy. She sees him pulling these teeth, and as a result, he becomes a symbol of ripping away the lust. For several weeks, the tall, dark girl and the doctor were together almost every day. The condition that had brought her to him passed in an illness, but she was like one who had discovered the sweetness of the twisted apples. She could not get her mind fixed again upon the round, perfect fruit that is eaten in the city apartments. In the fall, after the beginning of her acquaintanceship with him, she married Dr. Reefy, and in the following spring she died. During the winter, he had read to her all the odds and ends of thoughts he had scribbled on the bits of paper. After he had read them, he laughed and stuffed them away in his pockets to become round, hard balls. So I hope you like that story. We're going to talk about it more in class. Why is he a grotesque? And the next story you're going to read by yourselves is Mother. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.